The sound of a chainsaw pierced the tranquil Saturday morning. Karen, the self-appointed president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, was on a mission to prune the trees in her neighbor's yard. "These trees are completely out of control," she muttered, her eyes narrowed in determination. "They're ruining the curb appeal of the entire neighborhood." Ignoring the protests of her neighbor, Jill, who frantically ran outside in her pajamas, Karen continued her assault on the lush, verdant foliage. "This is for the greater good of the community," she yelled over the roar of the engine, her face flushed with a sense of righteous indignation. Jill watched in horror as Karen systematically lopped off branch after branch, the once majestic trees reduced to mere stumps. "Stop. These trees are protected by federal law," she cried, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Karen's smile only widened as she surveyed her handiwork. "They're much better. Now the whole neighborhood will thank me for improving property values." Jill could only stare in disbelief, her heart racing with a mixture of anger and sheer bewilderment. "You have no idea what you've done," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. As the last of the tree branches hit the ground, Karen wiped the sweat from her brow, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of her actions. "Well, that's that," she announced, satisfied with her work. "Now let's move on to the next eyesore in the community." Jill knew she had to act quickly before the situation spiraled out of control. She rushed inside, frantically dialing the number for the local Environmental Protection Agency. "Hello, yes, I need to report a violation of the Endangered Species Act," she said, her words tumbling out in a hurried panic. While Jill waited on hold, Karen sauntered over to her next target, the neighbor's meticulously manicured flower beds. "These need to go too," she muttered, already envisioning the perfect, uniform landscaping that would replace them. Just as Karen reached for her pruning shears, a booming voice interrupted her. "Mom, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the plants." Two uniformed officers strode towards her, their expressions stern. Karen's eyes widened in surprise. "What's the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice laced with indignation. "I'm the president of the HOA, and I'm simply trying to maintain the aesthetic of our community." "Mom, the trees you just cut down were protected under the Endangered Species Act," one of the officers said, his tone firm. "We've received a report of a violation, and we're here to investigate." Karen's face fell as the realization of her actions dawned on her. But I was just trying to improve the neighborhood," she stammered, her confidence beginning to waver. The other officer stepped forward, his expression stern. "Regardless of your intentions, you've broken the law. We're going to need you to come with us to the station and provide a statement." As the officers escorted a bewildered Karen to their patrol car, Jill watched from her porch, a small smile of satisfaction playing on her lips. The neighborhood's self-appointed gatekeeper had learned a valuable lesson. Not all battles can be won through sheer force of will and a misguided sense of authority. The ride to the police station was a deafening silence, punctuated only by the occasional crackle of the officers' radios. Karen sat in the back seat, her mind racing with a mixture of confusion, anger, and a growing sense of dread. As they pulled into the station, the officers escorted Karen through the bustling lobby, drawing curious glances from the other officers and civilians present. The sound of her heels clicking against the linoleum floor only served to heighten her growing discomfort. Once inside the interrogation room, the officers sat across from Karen, their expressions unreadable. "Mom, can you please explain to us exactly what happened at your neighbor's property this morning?" the older officer asked, his voice calm and measured. Karen straightened her posture, determined to maintain an air of confidence despite the circumstances. "I was simply trying to maintain the aesthetic of our community," she began, her words laced with a hint of defiance. "Those trees were an eyesore, and as the president of the HOA, it's my duty to ensure our neighborhood upholds a certain standard of appearance." The younger officer leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "But you were informed that those trees were protected under federal law, correct?" Karen hesitated, the color draining from her face. "Well, yes, but my neighbor was being unreasonable. She should have kept those trees properly maintained in the first place." The older officer shook his head, his expression one of disappointment. Mom, that's not how the law works. Regardless of your personal opinions, you cannot simply destroy protected vegetation on your neighbor's property without their consent. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line as she struggled to find the right words. But I was trying to improve the neighborhood. Surely you can understand my position as the HOA president. The younger officer leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest. I'm afraid your position as HOA president doesn't supersede federal environmental laws. In fact, it seems you've abused your authority and caused significant damage to your neighbor's property. Karen's face flushed with indignation. Abuse my authority? I was simply doing what's best for the community. The older officer held up a hand, silencing her. Ma'am, we received multiple reports of you harassing your neighbors and overstepping your bounds as HOA president. This incident with the protected trees is just the latest in a long line of complaints. Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, her mind grasping for a coherent response. She had always prided herself on her dedication to the community. But now it seemed that her actions had backfired in the worst possible way. The officers exchanged a meaningful glance before the younger one spoke up. Based on the evidence, we have no choice but to place you under arrest for destruction of federal property in violation of the Endangered Species Act. As the officers moved to handcuff her, Karen's eyes widened in panic. Arrest? You can't be serious. This is all a misunderstanding. But the officers paid no heed to her protests, gently guiding her from the room and towards the holding cells. Karen's heart raced, her mind reeling from the sudden turn of events. How had her noble crusade to beautify the neighborhood gone so horribly wrong? The jail cell was a far cry from the pristine, manicured world that Karen had so meticulously curated in her own neighborhood. The cold, steel bars and the stale, musty air only served to heighten her growing sense of unease. As she paced the confines of the small space, her mind whirled with a mixture of indignation and disbelief. This is all a misunderstanding, she muttered under her breath, her fingers drumming against the cell bars in a nervous rhythm. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Karen's head snapped up to see her husband, Richard, striding towards her, his face etched with concern. Karen, what on earth happened? He asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of confusion and worry. Karen quickly explained the events of the morning, her words spilling out in a jumbled, frantic manner. I was just trying to improve the neighborhood, Richard. Those trees were an eyesore. As the HOA president, it's my duty to maintain the community's aesthetic. Richard's brow furrowed as he listened, his expression slowly shifting from concern to a hint of exasperation. Karen, you know these trees are protected by federal law. Didn't you stop to think about the consequences of your actions? Karen's eyes narrowed, her defensive instincts kicking in. Of course I did. But my neighbor was being unreasonable. She should have kept those trees properly maintained in the first place. Richard sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. That's not the point, Karen. You can't just take matters into your own hands, especially when it comes to protected environmental resources. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but the sound of a key turning in the lock interrupted her. The cell door swung open, and a uniformed officer stepped inside, his expression stern. Mrs. Simmons, your bail has been posted, he announced, his tone clipped and formal. You're free to go, but I'd advise you to stay out of trouble from now on. Karen's shoulders sagged with relief, and she quickly followed the officer out of the cell, Richard trailing behind her. As they made their way towards the exit, Karen couldn't help but feel a twinge of resentment towards the situation. I can't believe I'm being treated like a criminal, she grumbled, her eyes narrowed in a petulant glare. All I was trying to do was make the neighborhood look better. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression one of understanding, albeit tinged with a hint of exasperation. I know, Karen, but you have to understand that your actions had real consequences. Those trees were protected by federal law, and you can't just disregard that kind of thing, even if you think it's for the greater good. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her pride still stinging from the humiliation of her arrest. As they stepped out into the bright, sunny day, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settling in the pit of her stomach. This was far from over, and she was determined to make things right no matter the cost. Back in the comfort of her own home, Karen paced the floor, her mind racing with a mix of emotions. The events of the morning had left her feeling shaken and defensive, her carefully curated sense of control and authority shattered. As Richard watched her from the couch, his expression a mix of concern and exasperation, Karen couldn't help but feel a sudden surge of resentment towards her husband. "Why didn't you stop me this morning?" she demanded, her voice laced with accusation. Richard's brow furrowed. "Stop you? Karen, I wasn't even there. How was I supposed to know you were going to go on some kind of tree-cutting rampage?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing. "Well, you know how I feel about the aesthetics of our neighborhood. I'm the HOA president, for heaven's sake. It's my job to ensure that everything looks pristine and well-maintained." Richard raised a hand, his tone placating. "I understand that, honey, but you can't just ignore the law whenever it suits you. Those trees were protected, and you knew that." Karen opened her mouth to retort, but the sound of the doorbell interrupted her. With a frustrated huff, she stormed towards the door, flinging it open to reveal a stern-faced man in a suit. "Mrs. Simmons," the man asked, his voice formal and clipped. Karen straightened her posture, trying to regain a semblance of her former confidence. "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you?" The man produced a thick envelope from his briefcase, handing it to Karen. "You've been served. The homeowner, Jill Winters, is suing you for destruction of federal property in violation of the Endangered Species Act." Karen's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she took the envelope. "Suing me? But I was just trying to improve the neighborhood." The man shook his head, his expression impassive. "That's not how the law sees it, ma'am. You caused significant damage to protected trees on a private property, and now you're facing the consequences." As the man turned to leave, Karen felt a surge of panic rise within her. "Wait, what am I supposed to do? I can't be sued. I'm the HOA president." The man paused, casting a sidelong glance at Karen. "I'd suggest you consult a lawyer, Mrs. Simmons. This is a serious matter, and it's not going to go away just because of your position in the HOA." With that, the man turned and walked away, leaving Karen standing in the doorway, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. She slowly closed the door, her mind reeling with the implications of this latest development. Richard approached her, his expression grave. "Karen, this is serious. You could be facing some hefty fines or even jail time if you're found guilty." Karen's shoulders slumped, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. "But I was just trying to make the neighborhood look better," she whispered, her voice tinged with a hint of desperation. As the realization of her actions dawned on her, Karen felt a creeping sense of dread begin to take hold. This was far more than just a simple misunderstanding. She was now facing the very real possibility of significant legal consequences. And with the lawsuit looming, Karen knew that her carefully constructed world was about to be turned upside down. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity for Karen Simmons. Determined to avoid the looming legal repercussions, she reached out to a team of lawyers, intent on building a case that would exonerate her from the charges. However, as the details of the lawsuit began to unfold, Karen quickly realized that her defense was on shaky ground. The evidence against her was overwhelming, from the video footage captured by her neighbor, Jill, to the testimony of the arresting officers. Sitting across from her lawyers in their pristine, wood-paneled office, Karen felt a growing sense of unease. "But I was just trying to improve the neighborhood," she protested, her voice tinged with a hint of desperation. "Surely the court will understand that." The lead attorney, a seasoned and imposing figure, shook his head, his expression grave. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Simmons, but the law is quite clear on this matter. Your actions, regardless of your intentions, were in direct violation of federal environmental regulations." Karen's brow furrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "But I'm the president of the HOA. Surely that should count for something." The attorney leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk before him. "I understand your position, Mrs. Simmons, but I'm afraid your role as HOA president doesn't grant you any special exemptions from the law. In fact, it may even work against you, as it suggests a pattern of behavior in which you abuse your authority." Karen's shoulders slumped, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. "So, what are my options?" she asked, her voice small and resigned. The attorney cleared his throat, his expression turning slightly more sympathetic. "Well, we can try to negotiate a settlement with the plaintiffs, but given the severity of the charges, that may be a difficult task. Your best course of action may be to plead guilty and hope for a lenient sentence." Karen's eyes widened, a surge of panic rising within her. "Plead guilty? But I can't do that. I'll be ruined. My reputation will be destroyed." The attorney raised a hand, his tone calm and measured. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Simmons, but at this point, it may be the best way to mitigate the potential consequences. The alternative is to risk a much more severe punishment if the case goes to trial and you're found guilty." Karen's mind raced, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The thought of pleading guilty, of admitting to her wrongdoing, was a bitter pill to swallow. But as she mulled over the attorney's words, she realized that she had little choice. With a heavy sigh, Karen nodded, her eyes downcast. "All right, let's do it. But I want to make sure that my statement is as favorable as possible. I can't let this destroy everything I've worked for." The attorney nodded, his expression somber. "I'll do my best to negotiate the terms, Mrs. Simmons, but you need to understand that the consequences of your actions will still be severe. This is not going to be an easy process, and your reputation may suffer regardless of the outcome." As Karen left the law office, a sense of dread and resignation settled over her. She had never imagined that request to maintain the perfect neighborhood would lead her down this path. But now she had no choice but to face the consequences of her misguided actions. The day of the court hearing dawned, and Karen found herself standing before a judge, her heart pounding in her chest. Dressed in her best power suit, she tried to project an air of confidence, but the trembling of her hands betrayed her inner turmoil. As the proceedings began, the prosecutor laid out the case against her, meticulously detailing the events of that fateful morning when Karen had taken it upon herself to improve the neighborhood by destroying the protected trees on Chill's property. Karen listened, her jaw clenched, as the evidence was presented, the video footage, the testimony of the officers, and the expert witness who confirmed the rarity and ecological significance of the trees in question. When it came time for her attorney to present her defense, Karen felt a fleeting moment of hope. But as her lawyer rose to speak, his tone was somber and resigned. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Karen Simmons, acknowledges the gravity of her actions and wishes to plead guilty to the charges of destruction of federal property and violation of the Endangered Species Act." Karen's heart sank, her carefully constructed facade crumbling as she realized the full weight of her decision. She had no choice but to admit her wrongdoing, despite the sting of humiliation that threatened to overwhelm her. The judge regarded her with a steely gaze, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Simmons, do you understand the implications of your plea?" Karen swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor. I take full responsibility for my actions and the consequences they have brought upon me and my community." The judge nodded, his expression softening ever so slightly. "Very well. This court will take your plea into consideration when determining the appropriate sentence." As the hearing continued, Karen sat in stunned silence, her mind racing with the implications of her decision. She had always prided herself on her unwavering commitment to her role as HOA president, her determination to maintain the pristine appearance of the neighborhood at all costs. But now, as she faced the harsh reality of her actions, Karen couldn't help but feel a growing sense of remorse and regret. The thought of having to admit her wrongdoing, of potentially facing fines or even jail time, was a bitter pill to swallow. As the judge called for a recess, Karen's attorney approached her, his expression grave. "Mrs. Simmons, the judge seems willing to consider a lenient sentence, given your decision to plead guilty. However, the damage you've caused is significant, and the court may still impose a substantial penalty." Karen nodded, her mind still reeling from the events of the day. "I understand," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I never thought it would come to this." Her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression one of understanding. "I know, Mrs. Simmons, but sometimes We have to face the consequences of our actions, no matter how difficult it may be. As they returned to the courtroom, Karen steeled herself for the verdict, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come to a crucial crossroads, and the outcome would undoubtedly have far-reaching implications for her future, both personal and professional. The judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom, commanding the attention of all present. Karen held her breath, her eyes fixed on the imposing figure seated before her. Mrs. Karen Simmons, after careful consideration of the evidence and your plea of guilty, this court has determined an appropriate sentence. Karen's fingers gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white with the intensity of her grip. This was the moment of truth, the moment that would determine the fate of everything she had worked so hard to build. For the charges of destruction of federal property and violation of the Endangered Species Act, the court hereby sentences you to a fine of $50,000 and 200 hours of community service. Karen blinked, her mind struggling to process the words, a fine and community service. She had been bracing herself for the worst, yet the judge's ruling seemed almost lenient. Additionally, you are hereby stripped of your position as president of the Homeowners Association, effective immediately. The HOA will be required to hold new elections and appoint a new president within the next 30 days. At these words, Karen felt her heart sink. The loss of her coveted HOA presidency was a blow to her pride, a tangible reminder of the consequences of her actions. The judge fixed her with a stern gaze, his voice firm. Mrs. Simmons, I hope this serves as a lesson to you and others in positions of authority. Your role as HOA president does not grant you the right to disregard the law or infringe upon the rights of your neighbors. Karen nodded mutely, her throat constricted with a mixture of emotions, relief, disappointment, and a lingering sense of shame. As the court was adjourned, Karen's attorney approached her, a faint smile on his lips. That could have been much worse. Mrs. Simmons, the judge was quite lenient, considering the severity of your actions. Karen let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her defeat. I suppose so, but the loss of my position on the HOA is like losing a part of myself. The attorney placed a hand on her arm, his expression one of understanding. I know it's difficult, but you have to look at the bigger picture. This could have resulted in jail time or an even heftier fine. You're lucky the judge was willing to be so understanding. Karen nodded, her mind drifting to the future. What happens now? How do I move forward from this? The attorney paused, considering his words carefully. Well, you'll need to pay the fine, of course, and complete your community service. As for the HOA, you'll need to step aside and allow the community to elect a new president. It's a chance for you to reflect on your actions and perhaps find a new purpose. Karen's brow furrowed. The idea of losing her position as HOA president still a bitter pill to swallow. But as she thought about the gravity of her mistakes, she realized that the attorney was right. This was an opportunity for her to reevaluate her priorities and to find a new way to contribute to her community. With a deep breath, Karen straightened her posture, a newfound determination sparking within her. All right then, let's get this done. I'm ready to face the consequences of my actions and move forward. The next few months proved to be a humbling experience for Karen Simmons. As she paid the hefty fine and dutifully completed her community service, she found herself navigating a world far removed from the carefully curated one she had once presided over as HOA president. Gone were the days of wielding her authority over the neighborhood, of dictating the acceptable standards of appearance and behavior. Instead, Karen found herself working alongside a diverse group of community members, each with their own unique perspectives and priorities. It was during these community service projects that Karen began to truly understand the impact of her actions. She listened to the stories of her neighbors, many of whom had been on the receiving end of her misguided attempts at improving the neighborhood. The pain and frustration they expressed resonated with her, chipping away at the armor of self-righteousness she had so carefully constructed. As she toiled alongside these individuals, Karen found herself slowly shedding her old persona, the one that had so zealously championed the ideals of the HOA. In its place, a newfound sense of humility and understanding began to emerge. One day, as she was helping to clear out an overgrown community garden, Karen found herself in conversation with Jill, The neighbor whose trees she had so ruthlessly destroyed. And never thanked you, Jill said, her voice soft but laden with emotion. Karen looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. Thanked me? For what? Jill's lips curved into a wry smile. For what you did, for bringing me and the rest of the community together. It's been a long time since we've all worked so closely on a project like this. Karen's eyes widened, the realization slowly dawning on her. But I thought you hated me. I mean, I destroyed your trees, and you sued me? How can you be thanking me? Jill shrugged, her expression pensive. At first, I was furious. Those trees were a part of my family's legacy, and you just came in and destroyed them without a second thought. She paused, her gaze meeting Karen's. But then I realized that your actions, as misguided as they were, actually brought something positive to the community. Karen felt a flush of shame creep up her neck. I never intended for that to happen. I was just trying to make the neighborhood better. Jill nodded, her expression softening. I know, and that's the problem, isn't it? We all want what's best for our community, but we don't always see the bigger picture. Karen mulled over Jill's words, a heavy sigh escaping her lips. I suppose you're right. I got so caught up in my own vision of perfection that I forgot about the people and the environment I was trying to improve. Jill placed a hand on Karen's arm, a genuine smile spreading across her face. Well, I think this experience has taught you an important lesson. And who knows, maybe you'll find a new way to contribute to the community that doesn't involve chainsaws and lawsuits. Karen couldn't help but chuckle at the remark, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. I think you might be right about that. As she continued to work alongside her neighbors, Karen felt a newfound sense of purpose taking root. The loss of her HOA presidency had been a humbling experience, but it had also opened her eyes to the complexities of community building and the importance of empathy and understanding. With a renewed sense of determination, Karen vowed to find a way to use her passion for improving her neighborhood in a more constructive and inclusive manner, one that would bring people together rather than divide them.